Hello, welcome back. In this lecture, we will look at Macaulay's Minutes, the infamous minutes of Macaulay. It's very interesting to note the importance of this major minute. A bureaucratic meeting took place where minutes were taken, and they go on to shape the history of our nation. So uh, that's why I'm trying to contextualize some of you, as some of you would have understood in the previous lectures. I'm trying to reach to that historical juncture where English becomes the medium of instruction, and therefore I'm trying to bring into play all the historical conversations at this point of time, the conversations between Anglicists and Orientalists. And then we looked at Ramon Roy's letter, which was urging for modern education, which was more towards the Anglicist position, favoring their claims and demolishing, subverting claims of the Orientalists. Now let's see what Macaulay says. Many of us would have actually read those famous bits from Macaulay's minutes in many places. But this one is very, let's read in detail the kind of claims that Macaulay makes, because Macaulay's minutes, as important as they are to Indian writing in English, they are also important to another set of discourses on post-colonialism, on colonial history in India. Macaulay's minutes, in other words, are a distilled form of colonial ideology, and you will see it through the reading of this text. And he's again going back to everyone has a problem with the Charter Act. He say that a sum is set apart for the revival and promotion of literature. This is what I was telling you, that this is the ambiguity. And then the encouragement of learned natives of India for the introduction and promotion of a knowledge of sciences. This important bit is what Ram Mohan Roy was focusing on, that if you want to promote science and scientific inquiry, do it like they are doing it in Europe. And this is what Macaulay is also focusing on. So then he begins his argument. Obviously, it's an exercise in rhetoric. Many of his claims are false or far from truth itself. They fall flat on grounds of factuality. But as I said, it's an exercise in rhetoric. Macaulay's job here is to persuade the government to implement English education. So therefore, he asks that why should the sum that is set apart should be for Arabic and Sanskrit? Why should that be the case? It should be for European knowledge first, and from European knowledge he will extend it that like that European knowledge can only be facilitated through English. So Macaulay would work on two steps here throughout this document. He would champion European knowledge, that European knowledge is by a huge distance and a gap greatest on earth, and much superior than what is available in Sanskrit and Arabic. And that European knowledge can only be provided through English as a medium of instruction. Okay. So let's look what he says. It is argued, rather taken for granted, that by the literature the parliament can have meant only Sanskrit and Arabic, that they would never have given the honorable appellations of a learned native to a native who is familiar with the poetry of Milton, metaphysics of Locke, physics of Newton, but they are meant to be designated by the name of only such person as might have studied the sacred books of the Hindus, of all uses of Kasagras and all the mysteries of absorptions into the deity. So he is mocking the Orientalist, as we can see that it is already assumed that, like, by the learned native it cannot be someone in English. It would be only people who are like into Sanskrit knowledge, Hindus who have understood and have paid attention to Sanskrit learnings itself, who have pandit, who are a pandit in Sanskrit knowledge systems. But he says, he picks on the second part of it. This lack of rupees is set apart not only for reviving literature in India. He says it's not only set for that, right? Because it is also for, as he says, it's not only for revival and promotion, right? It's also for the encouragement of learned natives of India and for the introduction and promotion of scientific knowledge, as you would see. So he is also for the introduction and promotion of knowledges of science among inhabitants of the British territories, words which are alone sufficient to authorize all the changes for which I contend. He picks up on that bit, and this is where the alignment of Ram Mohan Roy will happen, and he will explicitly also mention later that even the natives are asking for modern education, and therefore we should give it to them. But I want you to see the jump, which is not a logical jump, obviously, that happens here. That is a jump that is done by bureaucratic necessity, because English, if they teach English, that will be far more easier for them to govern in that. If they had to do modern education in any other language, let's say Sanskrit, Arabic, or the vernaculars in India, that would have meant a lot of money being spent, lot of resources being spent, which could be minimized by simply doing it in English. So that's why Macaulay's import here also finds sanctions with the government, that their government is in agreement with many of Macaulay's assertions. This is the reason, because it's basically maximization of your resources, a utilitarian principle, something that I was talking about in the last class itself. So let's look at what he says regarding this link between modern education, modern European learning, and English itself. The first part of the minutes is about highlighting the superiority of European knowledge, modern European scientific inquiry vis-a-vis the Oriental knowledge systems. He says the grants which are made from the public purse for the encouragement of literature differ in no respect from the grants which are made from the same purse for other objects or of supposed utility. This word will constantly reappear throughout the minute, because it stems from the same principle that was used by Jeremy Bentham, that how can we best utilize the available resources for greater good of the greater numbers, as it will go on, right? He would constantly keep harping back to it, and at the end we will talk about how it ushers in a very different kind of education system, a modern education system, which is based on utility, that where I can get the best out of the money that is spent on people in that sense. So, but then we'll come to that in a bit. Let's focus our attention on how he establishes the superiority of European knowledge vis-a-vis the Indian knowledge system. But to talk of government pledging itself to teach certain languages and certain sciences through languages may become useless. You again have the word use. One good way to read this essay might be just to look at the word use, utility, uselessness, and see in what context they are used. And you will see a certain kind of a binary that is being posed here. A binary where you will have English and Sanskrit being posed as useful and useless. That knowledge of Europe and English is useful. Learnings of English, learnings in Sanskrit and Arabic are useless. This binary was already posited in 1823 by Ram Mohan Roy. Roy there though was positing modern scientific knowledges of Europe as useful and Sanskrit learnings as useless already. That kind of a binary was already evolving prior to Roy's assertions in the assertions of Orientalists and Anglicists also. And Macaulay's assertions harp on those very binaries, and it solidifies those binaries very well, and we'll see how it does. Government pledging itself to teach certain languages and certain sciences, though those languages may become useless and though those sciences may be exploded, seems to me quite unmeaning. That the government's entire principle runs on utility. So why is government promoting certain useless subjects? So what should we do instead? That's what he says. He says, what is the gist of the matter? That we have a fund to be employed as a government shall direct for the intellectual improvement of the people of this country. The simple question is that what is the most useful way of employing it? That if the government has funds for this country, for the education of the natives, what ways it should be best done? And he says, all parties seem to be agreed on one point, that the dialects commonly spoken among the natives of this part of India contain neither literary nor scientific information, and moreover so poor and rude until they are enriched from some other quarter, it will not be easy to translate any valuable work into them. It seems to be admitted on all sides that the intellectual improvement of all those classes of the people who have means of pursuing higher studies can at present be effected only by means of some language not vernacular amongst them. In one stroke, he says that all of the languages in India do not contain any literary or scientific information. Two very important things. He is saying that if utility is based on this, that literary or scientific knowledge, none of the Indian languages have this. So it's all very poor and rude, and they need to be enriched from some quarter. So therefore, if we want to improve these natives, we need to bring something from outside already, because whatever is available is bad, is of a very inferior quality. You can see how he is establishing, how he is pushing for a very homogenized view. And this is why I said that it's an important document from a post-colonial studies point of view also, because what you get to see is that he is pushing for a binary here, where all of India, or as Edward Said would say, the Orient appears homogeneously poor and rude. that all the languages are homogenized into this kind of outlook where they contain neither literary nor scientific information and are poor and rude. So, all of them put together. How does he know that, right? That's why I said factually it will not be correct, because his own colleagues, the Orientalists, will tell the world that Shakuntala, Kalidas's Shakuntala, is one of the masterpieces of the world. That's what William James Jones would go on to talk about. Goethe, the great German writer, would lose his mind in talking about the greatness of Sanskrit masterpieces. So, if that was the case, then obviously literary merit is not at all under suspicion. So, but he attacks all the languages together. If probably someone would have asked him for a proof, he would have gone to some of the vernaculars, I think, and he would have said that, look, they don't have a grammar or a written proof or something of that sort. They don't have literature because there is no written like treatise or a history of it. That's why he clubs the dialects, that the dialects commonly spoken among the natives. And from there, he would come directly to Arabic and Sanskrit. So, that's why he invokes only the dialects. So, because the dialects may be at this point of time do not have a literary history book in that sense, in the sense of documented literary history for the claims to be challenged, but he makes the claim for the dialect. Very, very interesting maneuver that he does, the manipulative exercise that he engages in, and then he deduces from that. That's why I said it's a rhetorical exercise, because the dialect might have only a oral history to bank upon. He does not invoke them, but by association, all of India, and this is what Edward Said talks about, the homogenizing powers and discourses of Orientalism itself, whereby all of India is poor in the literary scientific way, right? And therefore, that's why he comes to the conclusion from there to this, and which is very often talked about in English literature classes, the infamous assertions. I have never found one among them meaning the Pandits who are working on India, he is talking about Orientalists here, who could deny that a single shelf of good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. So, from here, where he is rejecting all dialects, he reaches the whole native literature of India and Arabia. So, you can see what a perfect sleight of hand it is, that in rhetoric which comes so forceful, he is able to paper over the facts that this can also refer to Sanskrit and Arabic, in which his only his colleagues have found evidence that like they have great treasure trove of knowledge, that he is able to discredit all of this. And he says this, and it's a particularly nasty comment that he makes, that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. So, he would go on to argue that like, oh, this, look at this, and then this is also particularly significant from a post-colonial point of view, because if you look at post-colonial scholarship, what happens is people have pointed this fact that this idea of the library is a very interesting metaphor. Look at the metaphor of the library itself, that how is this library possible, and this kind of a library will be a library of, as we know today, will be a library of world literature, right? That where he is saying that if we imagine a whole entire library where we have books, or we compare two libraries side by side, one is a European library and one is a Oriental library, then a single shelf in European library can actually have much more value and manifests and enshrines much more value than entire Oriental library itself. And this is a very interesting 19th century phenomena, because as I was talking about it in earlier lectures, that the translations by Orientalists gave rise to something called the Oriental Renaissance, as Raymond Schwab will tell us. Venkat Mani's work on libraries sheds more light on this. What they tell us is that by the mid 19th centuries, they were all the big libraries in the metropolitan centers of Europe had sizable Oriental collections, where books from India, China and Middle East, Central Asia were already being translated and kept in these metropolitan centers that are there. As a result of this, we have concerns about world literature being articulated by Goethe, and also we have concerns that give rise to something called comparative literature or philology at this point of time, where you can see and compare books because they have been translated already. That is a concern also in translation studies and world literature studies also, where this kind of a comparison, and that is why I am highlighting this as a kind of an aside, that this kind of a concern and a metaphor that comes through Macaulay has a larger 19th century discourse in place, because, and he is giving this example of a library because it is a material reality at this point in 19th century Europe, because European libraries now also start having all these Oriental classics in their library. So, a comparison is also possible at this point of time, because the libraries are investing in collecting these things. Goethe, by his own, in his records, we come to know that Goethe had a very sizable collection of European Oriental classics itself in his own personal library. So, we now have these libraries that are there, which are also as sites of colonial domination. This metaphor therefore is very important to understand, that why is he giving this metaphor itself. This metaphor has its life there, as I was telling you, in Raymond Schwab or Venkat Mani's work, that the library becomes the site of knowledge and domination of knowledge. Therefore, because the European libraries have all these Oriental classics as well as the European classics and all the knowledge of the world, they are in the right position, or they are the experts to make this kind of a claim, that they are the only people who can make this claim. And that is why Macaulay can make this claim, because he is apparently also part of this group, right. So, that is why he can lean on these Orientalist experts, and imagine the kind of boisterous logic this, right. Someone who starts the paragraph by saying, I have no knowledge of either Sanskrit or Arabic, goes on to say that the entire native literature of India and Arabia do not have any merit when they are posed next to their European contemporaries or compatriots. How does he do that? Because the white man has now translated work, and that is why I said in the beginning that even if the Orientalist mission sounds benevolent, it has a colonial underpinning in it. Because the Orientalists have translated these works now, so they have now become experts. So I have read the translations of most celebrated Arabic and Sanskrit works, and there are enough scholars now who would tell you that how these early translations were politically motivated, and they kind of also manipulated and mutilated some of these works. But obviously, because they have translated now, they have control over that knowledge, so that makes them the experts. So that's why he has read those translations of most celebrated Arabic Sanskrit works. I have conversed both here and at home with men distinguished by their proficiency in Eastern tongues. So because they have had those experts, and they are now they are the experts who are distinguished by their proficiency. So all of these people, all this machinery has ensured that Macaulay can make this claim. And now you understand how Orientalism in a way was supporting Anglicists. If you go back to the essay by Gauri Vishwanathan, she would also make the same claim. Vishwanathan will tell us, even though Orientalists and Anglicists seem like two different ends of the spectrum, what happens with Anglicists and Orientalists is that Orientalists were probably urging for only an intermediary period, that whereby the native had to learn and be taught in their own language, only eventually to learn in English. So in a way, they were preparing the ground for English education to finally happen. Macaulay exactly does that. Macaulay calls out those experts, and he shows us how Orientalists were at the service of the government through this kind of an exercise. So what we learn then is that Macaulay deploys Orientalism only to subvert their own claims and to further claims of English itself.